Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Hard Histories conversation. My name is Emma Kakin-Bilski. I'm a PhD candidate in history at Johns Hopkins University, and I work mainly on histories of religion and race and violence in the early modern world. But I have the immense pleasure to be working with Professor Jones on Hard Histories at Hopkins this semester. And launched in fall 2020, the Hard Histories at Hopkins project examines the role that racism and discrimination have played at Johns Hopkins. And blending research, teaching, public engagement, and the creative arts, Hard Histories aims to engage our broadest communities at Johns Hopkins and in Baltimore in a frank and very informed exploration of the myths that have become part of our university story, and to offer evidence of how race and racism have shaped Johns Hopkins. And in spring 2023, we are hosting a series of conversations exploring the histories of Blackness, slavery, and racism in the Maryland area and beyond. And as part of that, today we are super excited to host a discussion about Loyola University Maryland's efforts into researching their own institution's hard histories. So we invite our panelists now to turn their cameras on. Okay, hello. And we are extremely honored to have with us today 4 great panelists in discussion with Hard Histories Project Director, Dr. Martha S. Jones. Together, our panelists will discuss their experiences, insights, and challenges undertaking the vital work of Hard Histories in Baltimore and where that work may go in the future. So our first panelist, Dr. David Carey Jr. is the Doehler Chair in History at Loyola University Maryland. And in addition to writing more than 30 peer-reviewed articles and essays, he's the author of I Ask for Justice, Maya, Women, Dictators, and Crime in Guatemala, 1898 to 1944, which was the co-recipient of the 2015 Latin American Studies Association Bryce Wood Book Award. His new project, Health in the Highlands, Indigenous Healing and Scientific Medicine in Guatemala and Ecuador, is due out with the University of California Press in July 2023. Congratulations. So Jenny Kinniff, panelist number 2, is the head of Archives and Special Collections for Loyola Notre Dame University, or Loyola Notre Dame Library, an academic library serving Loyola University Maryland and Notre Dame of Maryland University. And she previously worked at Johns Hopkins University and George Washington University. Preserving and sharing a rich, inclusive, and accessible historical record is the central mission of her work in academic libraries. She has published and presented on projects including a first-generation student oral history project, student research fellowships, and research into difficult university histories. Anna Young, panelist number 3, is from Long Island, New York, and will be graduating this May from Loyola University Maryland. Congratulations. She is a global studies major with a concentration in sustainable development. Additionally, she's minoring in international business and history, as one should. Last summer, Young completed archival research through Loyola's Apereo Research Fellowship. In the beginning of this process, she wanted to deepen her understanding of Loyola's history and how the university benefited from enslaved labor. Young also wanted to learn more about Baltimore's history during slavery and the Reconstruction era. Her hope is for her group's research to expand Loyola's historical narrative and push the university to recognize its past. So our 4th panelist, Brandon Nefferdorf, is a sophomore from Baltimore attending Loyola. A psychology major in pre-med, he wanted to conduct research at his school because Loyola makes up a large portion of his current identity. He also completed archival research through Loyola's Apereo Research Fellowship last summer. According to Brandon, learning about his school's past and its connection to historic racism completely altered his perception of campus, making him question his identity as a student there. Reconciling with attending a school with a racist past as the current student of color, he says, has been very difficult. And finally, Dr. Martha S. Jones, our fearless leader, is the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor, a professor of history, and a professor at the XNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. She is a legal and cultural historian whose work examines how Black Americans have shaped the history of American democracy. Jones is the author of a lot of excellent local Baltimore, Maryland history work, both academic and public facing, as well as Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All, selected as one of Time's 100 most read books for 2020. So Dr. Jones and our panelists will be in conversation for about 25 minutes, and then we'll turn to your questions. So please submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function. And finally, live captioning is available to our audience members within Zoom, and there's already a link to it in the chat. The live transcript URL for those who prefer to access captions that way. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And I will turn the conversation over to Professor Jones and see you at the end of the discussion.
Thanks very much, Emma. It's great to have Emma out front. She's been behind the scenes with us all semester in the trenches of our research this semester, but we're thrilled to have you out front with us today, Emma, and we'll see you in a little bit. And I want to thank this incredible panel from Loyola for joining us today. We too have been in conversation a little bit behind the scenes with each other as our projects have evolved. But I was so thrilled to have a chance to see the student presentations that you all did not so long ago. And we're really honored to have you with us. And I want to dive in and start, if I could, with you, David Carey, because as I learn more about your work, the resonances between our projects are really striking. One of the things that I think permitted for a long time our university to sort of avoid some of the difficult past was our founding date of 1876, which seemed to mark us clearly outside the boundaries of the era of slavery, past slavery's abolition, past the Civil War even. And I think, as I understand it, there is a similar story afoot at Loyola about your founding in 1852, only after the very troubling episode in 1838 of the sale of enslaved people, a sale that many people associate with Georgetown University, but it turns out there was more to that story. And in a sense, the 1852 date elided that deeper part of the story and how it's connected to the school's identity today. So maybe that's a setup for you to tell us a little bit about how you get to this project and how it is indeed that despite the founding in 1852, you all have this deeper connection.
Yeah, let me thank you too, Martha, for the invitation. It's really quite an honor for us to be joining you all, particularly because we've tapped into a lot of the work that you and others have been doing at Hopkins through Hard Histories as a way of helping us kind of forge our path. And you're right, that the resonance is really striking. So when the news first broke in 2016 about the 1838 sale that Jesuits made and sold 272 enslaved men, women, and children, it was sort of framed as an issue for Georgetown, right? It's kind of, this was going to keep Georgetown afloat. And the initial reaction here at Loyola was actually, well, we weren't founded until 1852. And so that's a number of years after the sale. So there's really no evidence of us having a connection there. And then actually it was brought to our attention a letter written in 1859 in which a person, Mr. Thompson, who had actually purchased the way the sale worked in 1838 was it was almost like a mortgage. It was sold and the payments were over some 20 plus years. And so this person had purchased enslaved people in that sale and incurred the debt to the Jesuits and wrote a letter asking if he could have an extension on the debt. And the response by the Jesuits in 1859 was no, because we're just founded a school in Baltimore and we need to pay for that. And so that was a kind of very direct link for us. And then really, with the sort of hard work of students like Anna Young, for example, who you'll hear from in a moment, we learned that not only was Loyola connected to that sale, but Loyola actually had used enslaved laborers on its campus in the 1850s and 1860s. So that was a pretty clear connection. The students also uncovered, Brandon and others, who you'll hear from in a moment, this 1860 census in which an enslaved woman is being held by the quote unquote order of the Jesuits. And we know the 1860 census is a little more specific about actually making that connection between slave holders and the enslaved people in those residences, right? So we had a kind of stronger sense there. And then, of course, the larger issue of, enslaved laborers working on Jesuit plantations where they're growing tobacco, corn, and wheat. And at least since 1717, perhaps before then, when they transitioned from indentured to enslaved laborers, Jesuits had been using enslaved laborers. And so any Jesuit institution thereafter was in effect benefiting from that. So we sort of saw these, larger, the more we were able to dig into it, these larger connections between Loyola and slavery, and particularly the slave economy. So it was clear that Loyola College was founded from profits from that 1838 sale, but also more broadly, that it was very much engaged in the slave economy.
You've mentioned, and we're going to hear from them shortly, Anna Young and Brandon Nefferdorf, but I want to ask you about your approach to the research and from the beginning incorporating students into the work. It's another thing that we share, I think, was putting students at the center. But we've encountered skeptics, folks who aren't certain that students can or should be helping to lead this kind of research, particularly because there are, the stakes institutionally are so high. So maybe you could say a little bit about how you arrived at the decision to put research in the hands of students like Brian and Anna. I've read you crediting them with having set a brave and firm path toward truth and justice. That's a lot. But why students, and why has that been so important in driving the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, and I think we share this with you all too, Martha, the way in which as institutions, we are really all about engaging students and learning, but also in research. And in many ways, they are some of the largest stakeholders in this, right? And I think you'll hear from Brandon shortly. It was an incredibly powerful story that helps us to kind of understand those stakes, particularly. But so that was pretty clear from the beginning. We really wanted to engage students, partly because we knew they could do this work. We could work it into their curriculum. They could do the research. There's also a sort of infrastructure available at Loyola that facilitated this. And that is that our Center for the Humanities has a grant called the Apereo Grant that Jenny, myself, and another colleague, Dr. Elisa Zimmerelli, were able to apply for, which gave us summer research stipends for 9 students. It also supported us teaching 2 different classes, one on history, one on writing the subsequent fall. And then it supports the publication of these findings, the research, and then the scholarship that the students are writing. So there's a volume that will come out at some point this calendar year that'll have these published student essays in them. And I think in many ways, sort of speaking to the quality of student at Loyola kind of generally, but specifically, and you'll hear from both Brandon and Anna, and I think people will sort of, that'll kind of put to rest the skeptics. But the way in which we set expectations so high, and they always sort of, reached and oftentimes exceeded them. In fact, Jenny, who you also hear from in a moment, I remember vividly, as we're traveling back, we had done some research at the Georgetown University archives, and she had just mentioned that the students really were doing graduate level research at that point. And even during our visit to Georgetown University, the archivist in charge there remarked just how impressed she was by how serious and professional the students were. And so on a very, sort of kind of academic level, they have been more than I think we could have hoped for. On a personal level, it's been a tremendous honor to work with such bright, committed, and inspiring people.
The other thing that we sometimes talk about with students in our lab is the way in which, in a sense, Anna and Brandon really represent the future of the institution. It's sometimes hard, but I know Anna's about to graduate, so she maybe is getting a sense of this feeling, which is you all become alums. Some of you become trustees. You really become the long-term stewards of the institution. And so for us, it has been so important to invest in future leaders at our institution, starting at that moment when they are students, and not waiting until, I guess, they've become, the great philanthropists and more that they will become. And so it's been wonderful. So, but I want to ask you one more thing, David, because you have become a student yourself, I think. We heard Emma Bilski's introduction. You're really a Latin American historian, very different time, very different place. So what did you have to do in order to sort of train yourself to be a part of this project?
Yeah, thank you, Martha. And I think there's a certain irony in people being skeptical of the students, because I'm probably the weakest link in this group, coming from, as you say, a Latin American historical perspective. But one of the things I tried to do was start from a position of strength, and that was the sort of methodology of history, particularly both archival, and then we're also doing a project of oral histories too, connected with this. But I felt like that was an area, okay, I really could sort of be a major contributor. And then, frankly, just as you can imagine, I'm sure you have a similar feeling, but I've just incurred so many debts in this process. People have been so patient with me in terms of telling me where to look for the historiography, what sort of questions even we should be asking in the archives. Frankly, the students have been really patient with me as I'm sort of learning as we're going along here. Colleagues have been super generous in sort of directing me towards really important sources, both in terms of a kind of history of the United States grounded in slavery, and then, of course, Black history, because we're looking at those legacies, African-American history. And so in that way, it feels like I've been able to, develop not necessarily an area of expertise, but at least competence, where I feel comfortable that I'm really able to contribute to this and to help to craft a kind of introduction and a sort of what's the larger context of what's going on here. But, again, as you were saying, it's not my area of expertise. And so I'm super grateful for all the people who have both been patient and generous with their own expertise with me.
Well, it's one of the things I have to say repeatedly over the course of a semester in our lab, which is that I don't know the answers either, right? That I really am discovering with students in real time. I don't have I think one semester students thought I had like a secret book, like in my drawer, and I wasn't giving away the answers. And I said, no, there's no guide, there's no answer key to what we're doing. And we really are on that journey together. And I agree with you. It's really an incredible honor. So let me turn to the students who've joined us. And I'll start with you, Anna Young, if I could. Welcome, and we're thrilled to have you with us. And I want to ask you a bit about, one sense, what it is meant for you to be a part of this research. And I understood that you took the work in a kind of new direction, really shattering a kind of silence about Loyola's early years. Even beyond the question of slavery, to talk about enslaved Black laborers and their role on the campus. So take a few minutes, if you would, Anna, and tell us a little bit about your work and what you found.
Of course. Thank you again, Dr. Jones, for having us. It's really an honor that students get to speak at a panel like this. So again, I just wanted to express our gratitude. I think the first part that I want to touch on is just the ability to feel like us as students were able to be proactive instead of reactive. I think in a lot of the classes that we've had, whether it be history, sociology, we learn a lot about injustices that have continued to exist for years and years. And I think coming into this research, by being able to have the chance to really dive in for 6 months and learn as much as we could and research what we were interested in, and then have that chance to actively, make a difference and try to contribute in a positive light to Loyola, I think is something that is really unique. And I think all of us were really excited to do that. In terms of what I wanted to focus my research on, I think a lot of us going into this, we really wanted to focus on people who are often excluded from the narrative. And I think doing this archival work made me realize how a lot of marginalized groups and people were excluded, and we don't have diaries or records from people who worked at Loyola, as we do with some of the presidents or professors that we had at Loyola. So I think navigating around that archival silence was difficult, but being in a group of students that were really passionate and creative, we were able to instead turn to city directories, local newspapers, look through financial ledgers, cash and day books. And then even at one point, we were looking through obituaries and like marriage certificates to try to put together the stories of these people that we don't really know much about. And I think the opportunity to get to do research at Georgetown, one student found that from 1855, our first president, John Early, actually rented servants from this family that had, been labeled as slave owners in the 1850 and 1860 censuses. So when we were looking at that material, we're like, maybe our story can expand beyond people just being listed as enslaved. And maybe we should take a look at what it means to be a servant in the mid 1850s. And then Jenny was able to find past records from 1804 listing that enslaved people were referred to as servants. And so I think that really shaped going forward that we would have to be doing a lot of reading in between the lines. And so then in 1854, we found this financial ledger that listed a hired servant. And so as a group, we collectively had to really think about what that meant and, things to look out for as we went further in our research.
Yeah, I mean, I was really fascinated by this kind of close examination that you all did of the term servant, because it's so typical, isn't it, that we have to set aside our kind of 21st century usages of a term or our assumptions about a term and think about it in the record. Is it your sense that servant has more than one meaning? Is servant or is it a way of avoiding, I teach the history of law, and we know that, the US Constitution never uses the term slave or slavery. It uses euphemisms for that. Is servant a euphemism in your research?
I mean, I think that's part of still what we're trying to uncover. It's really hard to say for certain. And although we had 6 months to do this, it's still, I feel like there will never be enough time to certainly know. But that was definitely a conversation that we had as to why some of the priests never mentioned slavery directly. And again, that was another challenge that we had, sorting through hundreds of paperworks in Georgetown's archives, going through these diaries and ledgers and trying to really read between the lines. And so I think that's a question that we're still trying to, really uncover.
Good. We look forward to hearing more. Thank you so much, Anna. Let me turn to Brandon, and welcome to Brandon Nefferdorf. I want to hear some about your experience, Brandon. Anna and I are both from Long Island back in the day, but I consider myself a Baltimore-arian today, at least when folks let me. And I understand, I think, some of what it means to research and to understand newly the place in which you live. So I hope you could talk a little bit about what the work has meant to you, and then a bit about your research, because you came across something very interesting and kind of curious, I understand, in the Loyola yearbooks, a great source for institutional history. And so I hope we could hear a little bit about your approach to the Clean Clothes Club, and how your thinking changed over time as you really looked underneath the KKK of the Clean Clothes Club to understand better what it was you were finding in those yearbooks. Thanks again for being here, Brandon.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Jones, and everyone with Hard Histories. It's absolutely awesome to be here. And so in terms of, being from Baltimore and then conducting this history like at my home, it's scary to say the least, because, you have this perceived idea of what, your history, could have been, what it should have been. and then what it actually is. And so trying to reconcile that is just, it's really difficult because you always know that on one hand that, you know, it's got this ugly, awful past, and there's not really a whole lot of hope for what you can do going forward, knowing that no matter what you do, it's always, you know, it's going to be there. But also it kind of fosters this sense of, you know, we have this community here at Loyola that, you know, and while we're still in the early stages of everything, we're working together to see what we can do to sort of bring this information to light, but also work ahead in the future. And in terms of the classy or the clean cut close, I think this really emphasizes like the highs and lows of archival research. So I learned that with a lot of this kind of research and study, you can't take everything at face value. And like we mentioned earlier, things that we clearly perceive now are completely different to how we would have thought 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so what I thought I saw was, you know, something that was clearly in support of the KKK with the clean cut clothes, like some sort of group or something. And so Dr. Carey, we reached out to a professor at Loyola that had a lot of expertise with the KKK at the time, especially in America and Baltimore. And we found that at this time, the organization was very much anti-Catholic. And so it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense for a white student at a Catholic Jesuit institution to be, you know, supporting the organization when it goes directly against the school. And so it was a big lesson in that it's really good to rely on the resources that we have because we're all learning. It's a learning process. And so being able to have, you know, these experts in the field is just, it's really important. But also it was affirmation that, you know, although that this piece of info didn't, you know, really pan out to how I thought it was, it's a little bit of reaffirmation that there are these little nuggets of information that we can find, and we just have to be, I guess, kind of keen-eyed to find it. And this is something that we all did together as a research team.
Yeah, because when I read a bit about your work, I too stopped at I was arrested, right, by the KKK. I agree. It is a real lesson in the way we work in real time. And, you know, it's been one of the things in our work, you know, that has sometimes been, you know, a gentle tension as folks would like answers yesterday to all of our questions. We spend time in webinars like this, helping folks see, you know, behind the curtain to appreciate the work that it takes, the time that it takes to go from a provocative discovery to actually understanding what it meant. The other piece you mentioned is drawing on experts around us. And that I think is something else that we really share is bringing on folks for whom our discrete questions are really something they've worked on for years and years and years to, in a sense, build up the lab. So we draft people into the lab a lot, Brandon, I can tell you, when the questions come. Let me turn to Jenny. Jenny, is that okay, Jenny Kinniff?
Mm-hmm.
You know, archivists have been so important in our work. We began working in the, you know, high COVID times where we were just absolutely barred from archives, you know, in-person archival work at all, and had extraordinary archivists who digitized things and otherwise figured out how to get us access to materials. So we bow down to the archivists and the librarians and the curators, and we're so thrilled that you're here to share your perspective. We know that you're guiding us through the discovery and the interpretation of materials. You've been on the front lines with these students and others. I guess what I wanted to know was how you help students in difficult encounters in the archives, and there are difficult encounters in the archives. I know that you have, for example, encountered references to human remains that were at least once, if not still, part of the Georgetown Museum's collection. And these are, for many of us as researchers, just unprecedented, unparalleled encounters with a very brutal, oftentimes callously recorded past. How do you work with students to take them from those tough sort of initial encounters to what we're experiencing today, which are students who are really now the experts and able to interpret this material for other people?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough part of the whole process. I think you can see, we're so proud of Anna and Brandon and all the other students that we've worked with. I mean, it does my archivist heart so proud when they talk about, archival silences and navigating all these different kinds of records. They've just been phenomenal. But yeah, the particular finding that you were referencing is a reference that we found in a letter that was an 1833 letter from a man named Henry Barnard, who was traveling around the Mid-Atlantic and visited Georgetown University during that time. And he describes the president of Georgetown, Thomas Mulledy, giving him a tour of campus and how jolly he was, uses the word jolly a couple times, which is just a really ghastly contrast with the things that Mulledy showed him, one of which included some human remains. He calls it a tanned piece of hide, of Negro hide, that was in their museum collection. That is not currently in Georgetown's museum collection, and they do not have record of it in their museum records, but there is this letter from 1833 that makes reference to it. So we found this actually when we had a group of student researchers at the Enoch Pratt Central Branch. So our students weren't just at Loyola and Georgetown. We were taking them other places that we thought might have fruitful avenues for research. So we actually found a published version of this letter in the Maryland Center for History and Culture's journal, the Maryland Historical Magazine from 1906, I think, something like that. So it was a real shock, honestly, because we found it in a published journal. We weren't expecting to stumble across something like that. And I remember, the 4 students that I was with, we kind of showed it to them and we talked about it. And then the next day, when our whole full research team was together, we had kind of a debrief meeting in the morning, which we often did, to talk about, here's what we found yesterday in our various, offsite research. So we gave some time in that meeting to talk about it as a group and to give people space to reflect. And I remember there being a lot of silence, honestly. We wanted to make sure that people had the chance to share feelings, but I think a lot of that processing was happening internally. And I would say, in terms of preparing students and faculty for that kind of work, we really tried to do it at the outset before anyone started any research whatsoever. When we were introducing the students to archival research, we talked about the fact that, we already know that we're looking for troubling history. And, when we find things, we are humans, we are not just, research robots. We all have different ways of reacting and processing those things. So we made sure the students knew that, their own human emotions and reactions are a part of the process, and that is totally fine. If they needed space away from the records, or they wanted to request to look at different materials, that they didn't have to continue down any path that didn't feel good for them. But I think also, to the point we talked about, I forget if it was Brandon or Anna that mentioned it, but how it feels to not find things. Because you go into this and you're so excited and you're ready to contribute and, unearth these facts and truth, and what it feels like to not find something. It can be really demoralizing. And particularly for students of color, I think to not see themselves and their community, their background reflected in the historical record can actually be a painful thing to come to terms with. So we had a lot of talk at the beginning about this stuff. I don't think you can fully prepare anyone for what their own personal responses would be, but just to lay it out on the table and let them know that this can be a part of the process, and that we were there to support them through whatever kinds of reactions that they were having.
Thank you for that. You know, we've been reading some essays in the collection that Leslie Harris and others edited on universities studying slavery, trying to use the experience of some of those scholars to guide and inform at least our own difficult reactions to some of the material that we are encountering. And I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to ask you a little bit later more about your own training, because you know, that's not a way I was trained. It's not a facet of the way I was trained. That I was trained to find the material, to interpret it, but I wasn't really trained to attend to my own well-being or the well-being of other researchers around me. And so this has been something that I have also been learning as we've been doing this work. So thank you so much for that. So I want to ask you all, if I could, a sort of big question, but I think you know that part of what is really informing and moving our work at Johns Hopkins at Hard Histories is the way in which we are contributing to a much bigger story about Baltimore itself. And it turns out like we are just two of many, many institutions in Baltimore that have been in these last years looking at their own histories, examining themselves. We were mentioning before we got going that last webinar we had Teresa Soto from the Walters Art Museum, where again, the Walters is looking at its founders and their ties to the lost cause, which is something I know came up here. So I want to ask a little bit more about the Baltimore story, because there's a way in which we might mislead folks to think that this is a story that ends for Loyola in 1865 or 1864 with the abolition of slavery in Maryland, with the Civil War and Reconstruction. But it turns out this is a much longer story. The story about slavery's afterlife, the story about racism. So anybody who'd like to jump in, help us think about how this work, you know, in a sense, even connects to questions we have about ourselves today.
I'll take a first stab at it, Martha. Thank you. And in another sort of parallel, part of what we hope to do is to expand the story, and I'll get to Baltimore in just a second, but the story about the sale in 1838 and the connection to Georgetown, to make sure people know it's not just Georgetown, it's the Jesuits, right? And so it's a much larger story in that sense. But in terms of Baltimore, yes, so after the Civil War, Loyola was really in many ways connected to this idea of the lost cause, and in fact would host poets and other kind of intellectuals. And in fact, Jenny uncovered a prize in the name of one of these poets, a lost cause, that continued to be a prize into the 1960s. You know, and so you're talking about the way these legacies continue to live on. And there was, you know, Brandon, some of the powerful stuff he found was blackface at Loyola, sort of from the early 1900s all the way into the 1950s. Even after Loyola had its first full-time day student, Black student, who enrolled in the late 1940s. And so there's sort of these, you can see these tensions throughout this period. And in some ways, it continues to be a tension today. One of the really remarkable bits of student research was a young woman, Maya Duplessis, who interviewed Black women at Loyola about their experience now, contemporary, and the sort of ways in which they are facing racism, both in the classroom as well as on campus more broadly. So it's something we continue to wrestle with. And that was an important part of framing the project. Was we didn't just want to learn about slavery, but we really wanted to learn about the legacies of slavery too, and the experience for particularly Black students at Loyola.
So Brandon, can I ask you along these lines, was blackface something you had encountered before, that you had studied before? What is it like to discover that in this process of research?
Yeah, it's really difficult. In the beginning of our research, we were meeting on Zoom a couple of times, and we had some virtual work. So I was going through the old yearbooks from like 1908, and in that I found mentions of like the yearly the minstrel show. So for context, that's just where a lot of white people would put on shows in blackface, and it's like a comedic farce, I guess, for lack of better words. And so just seeing that, like knowing like having like a background history of what minstrel shows are, and then seeing like my school community perpetrate that, it's shocking. It's just I don't really have the words to explain it. It's not good. And so yeah, I had to actually, when I was discovering some of those things, I had to take a step back. I had to take a breath and just sort of just recollect my thoughts. I called home actually, because I was like, these are some really complicated things, and I don't really know how how to really follow up on it. But with Dr. Carey, Jenny, Anna, and all of our research team in the school community, there was never like this sense of there's always a sense of there's a community here that's gonna support me. And so even though I felt pretty bad going through some of these documents, having a community behind me to support me was instrumental.
Yeah, when I think about this facet of your work, Brandon, what comes to mind, right, is how present, right, blackface can still be in some places, in some institutions. But here you've given us, I think, by your difficult work that you've done, giving us a context for understanding not only where that comes from, but what it means, right, for not only us in the 21st century, right, but what that meaning that comes from that long history that you've been unearthing, that very difficult history. So I guess we're going to turn to questions in just a moment, but maybe we could do a go round, and I could ask each of you. I'll start with Anna, if I could. I just want to know something about your vision for where you would like Loyola to go with some of what is now being uncovered through this research. We at Hopkins, we talk about this as reckoning, right? Is this confrontation with the past, but there are other folks who very rightly want us to also talk about reparations. So where would you like Loyola to go in the wake of this research and the ongoing discoveries that you all are making?
I think there's been a lot of conversations about what Loyola can do. And part of this, especially with so many students taking on this research project, I think initially right now, since we're in the very early stages, we're still waiting on the book to be published. We just want to make this history known and have students really contemplate about Loyola's past, being located in Baltimore and Maryland, which, was under the Mason-Dixon line, but was a border state. And there was a lot of internal divide between, students who were supporting the Confederacy or the Union. And so one of the things that we would like to do is, again, make this research known and bring it into light. And I think a student project right now that's in the works is creating a public art installation and trying to highlight Loyola's history in a timeline, and having a QR code where people can scan and actually read part of our research. And that way, current students, families, prospective students even, and community members can really get a sense of how deep this history runs at Loyola, and, just make them aware and say, this is what we still have to work with and reconcile. And hopefully over time, when people become more passionate and informed on this subject, we can really narrow down what the next best step would be.
Super, thank you. Brandon, what about you? I see you nodding, but
just building off of what Anna said, I think I'm not exactly an expert on what needs to be done in the future, but I want to continue to be involved with things that go forward. But I think one of the most important things is just incorporating like student voices, like having students be major facets of the research was incredibly important. And I think it doesn't have to be me. I mean, I'd like to help in some way, but I think incorporating student voices from every student, especially Black students, students of color, that see themselves as victims, I guess, not I guess, victims of this this history, and incorporating their voices to see what needs to be done moving forward. I think that's incredibly important and necessary.
Thank you. Jenny, what does that look like from an archivist or a library perspective? How do you hope that this sort of contributes to or even transforms your part of the university?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're just so pleased that, the archives is able to support this kind of research. And as Anna alluded to the public art project in the works, I think that there are many ongoing ways that people can continue to engage with this history and like share it and interpret it in their own ways. So we just want to continue to be a resource to support that. And I would say, I don't think we've mentioned them yet during this talk, but we are so blessed to have two descendants of the original sale of enslaved people who are participating in our presidential task force on this topic. But they've gone way beyond that. They are absolutely mentors to the students and to David and Lisa and I. They've helped us really understand how it feels to carry this history as part of your family history and what it means to them today. So I really can't say enough how important it's been to involve them in this process. So any movement forward that we have in terms of repair and reconciliation, I think would be done with their wisdom and guidance. And what I hear from them, at least, in our initial conversations, is that they're interested in culture change, like going way beyond an apology. How do we make this, like Brandon said, and Anna, a part of our understanding of the university's history, but also how do we use it to make the university the best it can be today? So, that's, I think, an inspiring vision that they have. So I would love to work with them to help make that come true.
Thank you for that. How does it look from a faculty perspective, David, when you think about beyond the reckoning, right, the repair, the reparations?
Yeah, I think I would second what Jenny said about descendant voices really being key, and that really sort of there's a presidential task force that's also been working with this, and that's been very clear from the beginning. And as Jenny said, that they've both been super generous with their time and expertise, and so we want to make sure their voices are kind of front and center in any kind of repair or restitution. The other piece is we've done oral histories. We're doing a course now with oral histories that Jenny's also working with from descendants. So Loyola students, undergrads, are interviewing descendants from the 272, and we're trying to get their voices more front and center in there. And then the other piece I would say, kind of from a faculty perspective, one of our kind of goals, and Anna has talked about this before, is to do a sort of first year module that we could plug into a course. There's a Messina course at Loyola that all first years take, so that everyone coming into Loyola would know something about this history, and then build on that through perhaps our Carson Institute, and every year have some sort of aspect of this history. So it's always front and center. You don't only get it your first year as a Loyola student, but every year you'll get more of this history. So that it really becomes part of the narrative, and as Jenny's saying, of the kind of cultural shift.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I have the strong sense, right, that in a way there's no end to the kind of the questions that we can ask, the things we can discover about our institutions. I'm not sure I'll be the person to be doing all of that, but how to institutionalize that capacity for self-examination, for self-reflection, for true research and connection with those questions, I think is something we're thinking about a lot as we are entering year 4 of our project very soon. So let me turn to questions. And the first one from Victoria Harms is for Anna and Brandon. Dr. Harms asks, you've talked about community when pursuing this project. She wonders what it's been like to talk to peers and other students about what you've been doing, but also about what it's been like to talk to your own families, your own communities about away from campus. What kind of reactions? She says the good and the bad, please. But what has it been like? Maybe Anna, you go first.
Yeah, I think for the most part, everybody that I've talked to, all of my friends and peers on campus have been really supportive of this. And we had a big panel, and I want to say like almost more than 100 people showed up, and it was predominantly students. And so I think there's a real push from the student body to dive deeper into this. And in terms of, friends and family from home, you'll get the additional, name changing another building. But it's hard, to really connect with people who might be a little out of touch with some of the work that we're doing. So it's just having a lot of patience and trust and leaning into people who have been doing this research for a really long time, and just trusting that what we'll do to try to honor some of the people who were enslaved at Loyola, and just really try to promote this new vision that we have together, and kind of shy away from any negative feedback. I think we've all been doing a really good job of trying to do a thorough job of doing this research. So just trust in the preparation and what we've learned from, Dr. Carey and Jenny and other professors that we've looked to, I think is the best way to deal with, that negative criticism.
Thank you for that. Now, Brandon, you've already mentioned literally phoning home. So what has it been like to talk about this work with your peers, but also with friends and family away from campus?
So in terms of talking with peers, like Anna said, like the response has been like overwhelmingly positive. I mean, I wasn't surprised about that, but it was kind of nice to see affirmation that the work that we're doing is necessary work, it's good work, and people want to hear more about it and they want to get involved with it. And in terms of family, like I mentioned, I called home during that one scene, but my parents, I mean, when I told them about a lot of the information, they weren't exactly fazed by it. It's like they kind of already knew that, like this understanding that, yeah, this history that you're looking into, it's not going to be pretty, or else why would you be having the research in the first place? And I think that really just a bit of a wake-up call to me, I guess, that like this work isn't going to get any easier. It'll just keep getting harder and harder. But because we have, peers and families that are willing to talk to us and help us walk through these difficult encounters and discoveries, it just makes everything that much more easier to get through, and it makes me want to keep going, so that I can say, hey, there was this really awful thing that I saw, but you know what, we're going to keep going anyway.
Yeah, and you all are really offering us a model and approach, I think, for how to do this work always. But as Dr. Harms points out, particularly in times where in some quarters there are questions being raised fundamentally, right, about the value of the kind of histories that you all are doing. So it's so important for us to understand sort of how you are weathering some of those challenges. So on the theme of repair, K.S. Hernandez mentions that the Virginia state legislature has passed HB 1980. I take that to be a reference to a bill in the legislature, which requires 5 major universities built before 1865 by enslaved labor to provide free 4-year tuition to the descendants of those laborers. Does this come up at Loyola and in your thinking? You've talked a bit, Jenny, about descendants. Has this come up? What is owed to descendants more directly?
Yeah, so David, feel free to jump in on this too. But I mean, when I went to a university studying slavery conference last year, there was a lot of talk about this bill, which has been passed, but I'm not sure it's actually been implemented yet, or, they're still trying to figure out how that would work. And I think from our perspective, particularly as a Jesuit institution, we don't want each institution to be operating, as a solo entity when our histories are all knit together and, inextricable from one another. So I think we still have a lot of work to do within our community about what kind of, amends restoration would make sense. But we have a sense that we would love to join forces with other schools that share this history with us, to come up, and in that way, be stronger together in our approach.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the University Studying Slavery consortium that we joined back in 2020, and I know you all have joined, and I think is upwards of 100 institutions, nearly 100 institutions today doing this work across the country. And I should have prefaced my question by saying none of us speak for our institutions in some official or definitive way. I certainly don't speak for Johns Hopkins, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to ask you, David, to speak to this question about sort of what does come up, particularly in thinking about descendants for you all, again, from your faculty perspective.
Yeah, so, I will echo Jenny again, and that is we've really tried to have the descendant voices lead us in this, and that being a place to follow. And so both Melly Colomb and Lynn Nehemiah are also working with Georgetown. And so we're sort of looking for that connection and sort of lessons learned from that and thinking about the ways in which this can play out. And I think, as Brandon and Annabelle said, Loyola also really wanting students to have a sort of, they already do have stake in this, but also have a kind of voice in this going forward. And so the presidential task force, I don't want to sort of get ahead of ourselves, but we are currently working on a report, and a big part of that report, perhaps the most important part, is this section on reparations. And I know there'll be an effort to sort of ask for kind of major contribution in our next kind of strategic plan as we sort of put this front and center. Like, this should be something that should be funded, fully in terms of, research going forward, in terms of the kind of repair and restitution we might be able to provide. And like you were saying earlier, Martha, I'm not sure we'd ever kind of find to a final resting point of what that restitution or reconciliation might be, but that'll be one of the tensions going on. But my sense is, yes, that, we'll get a richer sense from the kind of descendant community, what they think are kind of the most important ways to intervene here. Because, of course, in some ways, offering 4 years of tuition at a university is much too late for a lot of folks in the descendant community. The intervention's got to start back in kindergarten, right? We'll make sure people are getting a quality education to be able to be competitive to get into those schools and that sort of thing. So
thank you. I have to wrap us up, but I want to remind folks that in the chat you can find a link to the Loyola's research on studying slavery and beyond. And I know we're all eager to follow and continue to learn from the work that you all are doing there. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. It's really been a pleasure for me, and I'm going to pass the mic, as we say, back to Emma Bilski. Thanks again, Emma, for being with us, and thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much to Dr. David Carey Jr., Jenny Kinniff, Brandon Nefferdorf, Anna Young, and Dr. Martha S. Jones for this really, really rich conversation. We're honored to have had you here and appreciate how your research sheds light on the conversations we're having it and the questions we're asking at Hard Histories at Hopkins. In closing, I think I can say that we're especially honored to hear from undergraduates who've been in the trenches of this research, especially to hear your testimony to the fact that Hard Histories research can be extremely valuable for students as skill building. It's not just an institutional sort of penitential exercise. It's an incomparable learning experience for everyone involved. And it takes courage. So I commend you for your courage in this work. And so thanks again, and thanks to our audience for watching and for sending in your great questions. And thanks to the team at the SNF Agora Institute for their support for this event. You can learn more about Hard Histories at Hopkins at hardhistory.jhu.edu. And additional info about our event series, as well as YouTube videos of our past events, is posted on snfagora.jhu.edu/event. And we have, as you can see on the screen, we have exciting upcoming webinar events, April 5th, April 17th. Registration links are in the chat, and please also subscribe to our Substack at hardhistoriesjhu.substack.com, where we regularly post updates about what we're up to, including on the amazing research being done by our own undergraduate students at Hopkins. So that's hardhistoriesjhu.substack.com. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.